Well, this well, this well, decision making. What is good decision making?
Mám začít nebo začít?
Tak klidně já začnu, jestli chcete. Teda jak myslíte? Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's my great pleasure and honor to welcome all of you here to share wisdom and knowledge that is entitled Leadership in Action. I'm very pleased that we are here today and we have the possibility at Charles University to welcome so many highly esteemed guests. I will not talk further because all of you are really definitely very much eager on our speakers. I will just thank for the possibility that the Charles University can host meeting with our esteemed guests and can invite our students to experience and feel the leadership in action today during this meeting. So thank you very much for being here and I truly hope you will enjoy the meeting.
Thank you very much. So I would like to also welcome you in on behalf of the Aspen Institute Central Europe, and I'm very happy that as a part of the Aspen Ministers Forum we can do this discussion, Leadership in Action, because it's quite important during those days, you know, to understand and to have, as was said, the wisdom of the people who were either governing a lot of the, not the governing the countries, but having also great experience in the international relations. So I'm very happy, and thank you very much also to the Charles University. Thank you very much to the Aspen Institute, and as well as thank you very much to the Bertelsmann Foundation, because we have done it together, and I hope you will have also interesting time. Today we will have two panels. The first panel will be leadership in action. The second panel will be about the state of the world, current, and of course, what is most important for us are the moderators also. So I am very happy today that we have two of them. It's Tony Silberfeld is the director of the transatlantic relations at the Bertelsmann Foundation, and in his research he focuses on the intersection of the technology and democracy in Europe and the United States, and he's currently developing two online platforms that provide geopolitical forecasting capacity and in-depth analysis of the Americas' bilateral relationships with European partners. So Tony, welcome. So you will be on the stage in a minute. And the second moderator will be Ladislav Krištofek. He's a vice rector for research and the youngest professor at the Charles University. He's a senior research fellow in the Institute of Information Theory and Automation at the Czech Academy of Science. And he's also the most successful young Czech economist and among 10 most cited Czech scientists. So also welcome and thank you very much. So I hope you will enjoy the discussion, a very interesting discussion. You can ask the questions then at the end, but now I will ask Tony. The floor is yours, and thank you for being with us.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Good morning. Thanks very much. My name is Tony Silberfeld. I'm the Director of Transatlantic Relations at the Bertelsmann Foundation. It really is a pleasure to be here at Charles University. I'm always humbled to be standing in a building that's 400 years older than my country. It's really something and startling in many ways, but I really am delighted to be here, and thank you very much, not only for being warm hosts, but to all of you students who are here. I know you all have busy days, and it really is a pleasure to have you here and to be able to share this conversation with you, with our three distinguished colleagues who you'll see in just a moment. My job today is to keep the trains running on time. We've got a really interesting program with the group of folks that we have to speak to you today. We hope that in the course of the discussion, you'll engage in a Q&A as well. We'll do that probably for the last 15 minutes or so of our conversation, maybe longer. We'll see how it goes. So don't feel like you're on the spot. It's really an opportunity to engage with people who have a lot of experience and really interesting insights into what's happening in the world. Before we get into the conversation, I just want to start with a sample of our work, Leadership in Action. So just very briefly, this is a brainchild that comes out of COVID. The Aspen Ministers Forum is a program that gets together on an annual basis, brings together former foreign ministers, prime ministers, to discuss the issues of the day and make an effort towards solving some of the more intractable problems that exist in the world. We thought, when sitting with ourselves and with the Aspen Institute, try to find a way to tap into that group who meet together to try to make their discussions accessible, to make their experiences accessible to the world at large and to students in particular. And we thought of different ways to convey those messages that come out of those discussions. We thought about written exercises, we thought about speeches, but really we talked to consumers, we talked to students about the way they're receiving information. And it's about documentaries, it's about digital animations, it's ways that people are consuming information today. And that's really what gave birth to the product that we're going to show you here in a moment, which is now coming up on its third season. So what we've done here is we've tried to distill experiences and lessons from the people who lived them, to try to give opportunities for you to learn, to see. It's really a mentorship program online, essentially, where you get a chance to hear and see through the eyes of the people who lived it. So without further ado, we want to show you an example. This comes from season 1. It's with one of our friends who are here today, Marina Kaljurand. It is the story about the 2007 Russian cyber attack on Estonia and how Marina Kaljurand and her government in Estonia dealt with that crisis. So we're going to sit for about 9-10 minutes through this animation, and then we'll invite our colleagues up to the stage for a nice discussion. So thank you again for having me today. Look forward to the discussion ahead.
Well, decision-making, what is good decision-making, who are good decision, it's a very, very difficult question. For me, crucial two words: inclusiveness, listening to everybody. But once the decision is made, We all have to be behind that decision.
My name is Marina Kaljurand. I'm a former Foreign Minister of Estonia, and I'm a former career diplomat of Estonia.
In 2007 was my second year in Moscow. I was posted to Russia as Estonian ambassador and presented my credentials to President Putin in the fall of 2005. I loved my work, representing my country in Russia, a country with which we have had centuries of difficult history and relations. My Russian background made it easier for me to reach out to people. I enjoyed every moment of my work and life in Moscow. From difficult negotiations with Russian counterparts to lovely meetings with Estonians in Siberia and long discussions with Russian liberals in their kitchens or dachas.
And then one day in April, almost everything changed.
2007 will go into history as a year when one state used cyber attacks against another state for political reasons. It all started with the removal of a Soviet war monument from the center of Tallinn to a military cemetery in Tallinn.
The bronze soldier was in the center of Tallinn since the early 50s or the late 40s, and it was a burial site. There were remains of Soviet soldiers on that site. It also became a place for, on one side, rightist Estonian people and extreme Russian nationals coming to the place to express hatred towards each other. Well, we're a democratic country, everybody has the right to express their views, but that place has to be appropriate, not on a burial site.
For weeks we had negotiated with Russians. We tried to do it together, of removal of the remains of fallen Russian soldiers to the military cemetery. And just a couple of weeks before the removal happened, we were told by Russian authorities that they do not want to cooperate with us and we have to face the consequences. So when the bronze statue was removed in Tallinn, then immediately demonstrations and looting started in Tallinn. Siege of Estonian embassy in Moscow. And cyber attacks against Estonia. Estonian institutions like banks, emergency services, websites of President, Prime Minister, government, MFA, MOD. For several occasions it caused shutting down internet.
Those were primitive attacks by today's standard. They did not kill anybody or destruct anything, but these attacks were disruptive and disturbing to a state that was known for its unique online services, including online banking, e-government, online voting, e-schooling, e-police, and so on. Cyber attacks were accompanied by information operations. Center of Moscow was covered with posters with my photo with Hitler's moustache. The text on the poster read, "Wanted ambassador of a fascist country."
We had youth movements that surrounded the embassy, that blocked the embassy, so embassy was cut from the rest of the world. My worry was how to evacuate people if something really bad happens, because, as I said, we were blocked. It was crucial to stop the attacks, to recover as quickly as possible, to introduce countermeasures, and to convince our partners and our NATO allies and to consult with them. Another important task for me as an ambassador was to try to find ways of cooperation with Russian authorities, to stop siege of embassy and stop cyber attacks. Unfortunately, it was impossible. Russian authorities refused to admit their responsibility and cooperate. For us, it was very important to have EU and NATO on our side. We don't have a smoking gun in cyber world. So in cyber, it's very much to provide information, to provide details, to provide data to your partners and convince them. And EU and NATO were on our side. We didn't find any other ways or means how to respond to the cyber attacks. So we did with the Schengen blacklist that does not allow certain people to enter not only Estonia, but the whole Schengen territory. So it was a powerful tool. We were able to escape that situation with the help of our EU partners and our NATO allies. We had strong political support, and in the end, Russians had to change their behavior. If I look at the events back today, almost I don't know how many years later, I think we were lucky for having those attacks, because they showed once again how important is cybersecurity, that it was a wake-up call for many other countries who did not pay much attention to digital services and cybersecurity until then. We have to learn our lesson from this pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, because this pandemic once again showed how vulnerable we are. The use of ICTs and internet, they provide great benefits. From remote working to education to fight against corruption, but they also bring challenges. And I think that not every country today understands the challenges. So far we haven't seen cyber being used by terrorists, but unfortunately I'm afraid it's just a matter of time. So the bad guys, they're not waiting, and we should not fall back. We have to be ahead of them. I have heard from my colleagues in other countries that they're not ready to introduce online voting because it has its challenges, it has its vulnerabilities. And my answer always is that everything has challenges and vulnerabilities. There are different vulnerabilities, there are different challenges. We have to face them, because that's the future. ICT revolution will not disappear, and smart countries take advantage of it as quickly as possible.
Thank you all very much. Please join me in welcoming our panelists to the stage. So I'm reminded when I watch this video, which I haven't seen in a couple of months, as I review it every so often, how much I miss seeing people in person. Doing these things via Zoom, there's really no substitute for seeing all of you here. Really appreciate you making the trip and joining us here today, and for all of you as well. It's really nice and an honor for me to do this. First of all, I want to begin. I don't want to do long introductions because I want you to hear from them themselves, but I do want to introduce the panel, at least properly. Marina Kaljurand, who you got a chance to meet just briefly there, former Foreign Minister of Estonia, former ambassador to Russia, among other places, and currently a member of the European Parliament. Marina, welcome. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you.
Beside her is Susana Malcorra, former Foreign Minister of Argentina, former Chief of Staff to Ban Ki-moon at the United Nations, and currently the Dean of IE's Global and Public Affairs School. Very nice to see you again. Welcome back. Pleasure. And we're also grateful to have Federica Mogherini here, former Foreign Minister of Italy, former EU High Representative for Foreign Affairs and Security Policy, and currently the Rector of the College of Europe. Thank you again for being here. Appreciate it. It's nice to see you. So the reason that I kept these bios relatively brief is part of what we're doing in Leadership in Action is trying to understand what makes a leader. Where do they come from? How do they evolve into the people that they've become? And so one of the things we're really fortunate to have here are three really interesting women with interesting backstories. And I hope we get to hear a little bit about that today and your experiences as well. So Minister Mogherini, I wanted to start with you. The first question that I have for you, and we'll have for everybody in this first round of question, is tell me about where you come from. How did you come to this particular moment? And I know we could sit here for hours and hours before we got to the core of that. But this is the abbreviated version of it. But I'd love to hear about where you come from.
From Rome, warm and sunny Rome normally. I think my journey that led me here started when I was in high school, around 16, 17 years old, and I started to be interested in what was happening in the world. And that was 89, 90, so it was an interesting time for the world, and I was just curious about what was happening. The fall of the Berlin Wall, changes in Eastern Europe, but also in the global dynamics. There was a feeling at the time of the world changing completely paradigm and possibly, new horizons opening up of cooperation and interdependence was the key word there. And so I just started to be interested in that. I actually never thought of becoming a part of the institutions or a politician. I wanted to be a journalist and report what was happening in the world. And the red line, I think, of my career has always been the interest for the rest of the world. Europe towards the rest of the world. My interest was the world. And then I simply followed this interest, however I could, in NGOs, student organizations, student life. I was student representative in school, studied political science, entered youth organizations, started on actually migration work in NGOs, civil society, Council of Europe, European Youth Forum, and then in '96, when Prodi was running for Prime Minister in Italy, and there was also a different dynamic in the Italian politics. That's too complicated, I will not get there. I joined the youth organization of a political party, always on foreign policy, European affairs. I was speaking in English and French, so I was the one sent abroad to do things, conferences, networks, exchanges, things like that. And so I continued then in the party, and then I was elected in Parliament, Foreign Affairs Committee, Defense Committee, and then I became minister for a very short time, only 8 to 9 months, and then I joined the European Union, the Commission, and met great friends, by the way. But I have to say, I always followed my interest for international and security and defense issues. I would have not become a minister for infrastructures. I would have not become the mayor of Rome. I would have not become the commissioner for health. My line was always my interest, and my interest was on foreign policy. Does that answer more or less the question?
No, that's a great start. And I just want to follow up for a second just to ask, was there any point, because they say leaders are not born, they're made over time. Was there a moment where either somebody took you under their wing and they said, you know what, we see a future for you? Was there a moment where the light switch came on, you said, this is for me? No. I never thought of myself as a leader. I still now wonder a little bit, what am I doing here? So I don't know. Now I realize it a little bit more, because being a rector of the College of Europe, I interact every day with students. And in that, I see the leadership and the mentoring role. But if there was one moment when something clicked, well, maybe twice. Once it was when I moved from the youth organization of the party to the party. My direct boss, a woman, a very strong one, we're all still very much friends, I would say family. She was the director for international relations in the party, and I learned a lot from her, and I thought, okay, this is something I might be doing for life. I like this. I like the way in which we work on this. And then the second time was when I actually first met Madeleine Albright, that I think we will honor here today. I just became minister since a couple of days, literally. My first visit was to the United States, and the Italian ambassador organized a nice dinner for me in the residence. And I was very much honored and surprised that she came, and she was sitting just at my right. And, for me, it was Madam Secretary, so I was very, I didn't feel on the leadership side, I felt like on the learning side. And I said, well, I'm really honored you're here, thank you. And she said, no, I came here to show friendship. And she didn't know me, obviously. And she said, because I've been there, I've been where you are now. You're relatively young. I became minister under a lot of skepticism because I was the youngest Italian foreign minister at the time, and I was a woman. So the combination of the two was quite shocking. And she said, I've been where you've been, and I want to tell you, I'm your friend. You're going to go through it. It's okay. We've all gone through this. It's not you. It's the world outside that treats you this way. You're going to get it.
And she told me this anecdote that I often tell my students, and especially women. She said, you know, after a few weeks or months, I was in the position of Secretary of State. My team started to tell me, you know, Madeleine, you're gaining weight. And my reply was, no, I'm not gaining weight. It's my skin that is getting thicker. And I thought at that moment, and that was really her. And I thought at that moment, this is exactly what is happening to me, both the weight and the skin. And I thought, wait a minute, if a giant like her went through this, then it's okay, then I'm okay, then it's okay. And it's just, well, it's not normal, it shouldn't be this way, but I'll go through this. And I felt so much empowered that I really felt this support and this friendship that made me realize that I was jumping on the other side of the leadership thing.
Thanks for sharing that. That's great. Appreciate it. Minister Malcorra, tell us your story.
Thank you, and thanks for having me here. Thanks for the organizers. It's a pleasure to be at the birth town of Madeleine. You know, it feels that she's here with us. I have a totally different story from the one that Federica just made. I'm an engineer, so I had nothing planned to be part of the international relations world at all. I'm from Argentina, as it was said, and my country is well known for its crisis every so many years. So I was... well, yeah, but you know, we are Italians to a certain extent. I wasn't meaning to say that, but now that you mention it. So I was in the private sector. I was a very successful businesswoman. I was a CEO of the third largest company in Argentina, Telecom Argentina. So I had it. I was there. I was happy. And in 2001, one of the many crises hit Argentina. And the company had to go into Chapter 11, which means, in practical terms, going into bankrupt. This is a listed company in the US, so I went to the New York Stock Exchange to announce the good news. I went to Tokyo, London. It was horrible. So a few months later, the board decided that they needed a person that knew about finance. I was an operational person. You know, I came from the business side. So they said, you have to leave. Now I tell the story in nice terms. It wasn't very nice to go through that at the time. So I left and I said, enough is enough. I am not going back to business. I want to do something in the third sector, in the civil society. I want to bring my experience to civil society. Long story short, I get a call from a headhunter that says that a UN organization, World Food Program, is looking for a Latin American woman. That sounded very, very strange to me. A Latin American woman? What does... I didn't know World Food Program. Well, again, long story short, I learned that in the UN there are regional allocations, and I learned that, of course, there was an emphasis to have women in leadership. It was a deputy position. So I went through the process and I got the job. I'm making this story very, very short. That's how I went into the United Nations. So for me, and from there I went to peacekeeping, and from there I became the Chief of Staff of the Secretary General, and from there I got a call from the then candidate to become president to say, I want you to be my foreign minister. That's the line. For me, this is all about reinventing yourself, allowing yourself to seize the opportunities as they come, to find your way through, to learn, and not to be somehow taken away from the opportunity to bring your own value, your own perspective, which is different. It was very different, my perspective, to what is there to be solved. And being an engineer, I'm obsessed with solving problems. And that's what unites the foreign ministers, the international relations community with engineering. We are there to solve problems through people with people. So that's my story.
Thanks for that. Minister Malcorra, I also wanted to follow up with you because some of the things that you said sparked a couple of things in my mind. So if you don't mind, without naming names, transitioning from business to politics at least in the United States, has not always been a successful transition. I'll leave it at that. But
I wonder why.
But I am curious, though, about it, because sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And so from your perspective, I was wondering if you think it is about character or practical experience, some combination of the two. I'm just curious your views on making that transition and what the value of that might be.
Well, let me start by telling you a short story. My friends in the private sector, in the business sector, were very worried that I was moving to the United Nations. And they felt that I was going to be really bored, that, you know, this horrible bureaucracy was daunting and I was not going to be able to do anything. And I found it exactly the contrary. Of course, I started in an institution that is very, very geared towards results, a logistical institution, you know, a humanitarian logistical institution. But what really struck me is that 3 months into my tenure in World Food Program, the tsunami hit Indonesia, and I was the only one left in Rome to lead that response. Of course, my background in the private sector gave me all the opportunity to manage a crisis, and I really somehow found a way to bring the team together. And the Financial Times came to interview me afterwards and had that exact question that you just made. And I said to them, yes, it's true that in the private sector you have huge pressure, the pressure of the shareholders asking for results every quarter. There is nothing compared to the pressure of being late a minute and losing a life. And that's exactly what you do when you are in this position. So if you are able to transition mentally and bring your background, but also appreciate the new opportunities, I think it's absolutely great.
Thank you. Good. Minister Kaljurand, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. Like others, I would also like to thank our hosts, and I would like to thank everybody who's making possible this event, but also being part of the group of former foreign ministers. Guys, trust me, once invited, join it. It's a special club, and it's a real challenge and privilege to be part of that. I've not seen your stories, ladies, but I think it's time for us to go on Netflix. I think we can do even better than Harry and Meghan with our story. So I'm looking really forward to seeing your releases coming pretty soon. My story is different from that of Federica and Suzanne. I come from Estonia, yeah? Estonia was independent from 1918 to 1940 and regained independence in 91, yeah? 91, I was 30 years old. I was mother of 2. I was a lawyer, happily married, teaching law at the School of Economics. And then I got a phone call from the then Estonian foreign minister. Estonia wasn't recognized as an independent state yet. And he asked me to join because of my Russian mother tongue. So I was a lawyer, I had a career, and I joined the Foreign Service to translate Russian newspapers and be an interpreter to the then foreign minister, who later became president of Estonia, Lennart Meri. It was a challenge, but for me it was an opportunity to restore my country's statehood. I very much hope that my kids will never have to do that. I very much hope that that will be once in a lifetime. But when the chance was given, I was happy to join the Foreign Service. And 15 years later, yes, I was in Moscow. Before, to put it honestly, I wasn't aiming at the position in Moscow. Representing Estonia, a tiny country, is very difficult. Everybody wants to talk to ambassador of US, UK, Italy, Argentina, everybody. Nobody cares about Estonia. They don't even can't find Estonia on a map, which means that you have to work twice, 4, 5, 10 times more than ambassadors of powerful countries. So my dream was to be Estonian ambassador to Latvia. Neighboring country, good relations, easy. But I ended up in Moscow, and after that I ended up in Washington. Today, of course, I'm happy about that, because working in those capitals, I would say those were the best diplomats I could meet. And in Moscow, at some point, I was the only woman. So there were 141 male ambassadors and me. And for Russian foreign ministry, it was rather difficult. They even didn't know how to call me. In Russian, you don't have a word for woman ambassador. Paslicha, paslyucha, they do not have the word. So they were calling me Marinочка. Yes, it was embarrassing. And I never called Foreign Minister Lavrov Serezhenka. Never. For me, he was always Mr. Minister. But for him, it was difficult to call me Madam Ambassador, and it was difficult for him to call me Madam Minister later when I was Estonian Foreign Minister. So Foreign Service came into my life out of nowhere. And when you saw me there in Moscow, I had to learn in 15 minutes what do DDoS attacks mean. I do not have IT background. I'm a lawyer. But being ambassador, you have to be prepared for situations that you're never prepared for. You have to be open-minded, you have to be ready to learn new stuff. So as Estonia was cut from major news services, all the CNN, NBC, BBC, and all the other newsletters were at our door. And for a small country, that's not a very popular one. To see all those outlets at your door queuing up, it was a real challenge, but I loved it, I enjoyed it, and I'll do it again if I can. So yes, after being ambassador to Israel, Russia, Kazakhstan, Canada, Mexico, and United States, I ended up in the European Parliament, which is also a very nice place to be, where you can say what you want. There is no checking each of your word, each of your commas. You're not speaking on behalf of the government, you're speaking on behalf of your electorate. And that's a fantastic feeling. So that if you're not offered the position of a foreign minister, join European Parliament. It's also a very good place to work with.
If you don't mind, I want to stay with you for a moment, because you mentioned something that has come up a couple of times on this panel already, and that's the issue of gender in leadership roles. And I'm wondering from your perspective, we're in 2022 now, your career began much earlier than that. Have you seen a positive evolution? Have we come far enough? I'm just curious about your views on gender in leadership.
Absolutely, absolutely. As I said, at some point I was the only woman woman ambassador in Moscow, and it was 2005 to 2008. Now we have, I think, half of EU. Today's war. Today is a different time, but let's say until the war broke out, I would say if not half, then 1/3 of EU ambassadors to Moscow were women. So I see much more of them. And by the way, when I was appointed to a specific country, I read about that country. And I read about that country from the memoirs of women. So when I was appointed to Israel, of course I took the memoirs of Golda Meir, read them. When I was appointed to Moscow, it was much more difficult, because they do not have many women ambassadors. The only one I found was the friend of Lenin, Alexandra Kollontai, from the Bolshevik time before the Second World War. But it was still interesting to read. And when appointed to Washington, of course, all the three secretaries of state. Hillary Clinton had written then her memoirs, but it was Condoleezza Rice, it was Madeleine Albright. So I was getting lots of information from there, from the women who had been in the same position before me. And of course, meeting them personally. No, that was, like Federica said, it's a shock. You're sitting at the same table with somebody, and is it really me? Is it happening to me? That can't be true. You still have the feeling. But today I see that there are more women in foreign service. And if I may, when I was foreign minister interviewing young diplomats, and I asked boys, young men, why do you want to join foreign service? The answer was quick. I want to be minister, I want to be ambassador. When I asked the same question from ladies, young ladies, they said that, well, I love foreign languages, I love culture, I love this and that. And I always said, come on, girls. If you want to be foreign minister, spell it out. If you want to be ambassador, spell it out. How come boys are saying and you are not? And I see that's changing. Now I see the new generation of women who are much more self-confident, who do not hesitate to say what they want, who know what they are worth of, and who go for their dreams, and I'm really happy to see that.
Thanks. I'd actually want to stay on this topic because I noticed Minister Mogherini gave a very knowing nod when you were talking, and I can understand in many ways why. I want to give her the opportunity to chime in on this. But I want to tie it to your episode, actually, of Leadership in Action, which touched on the 2015 negotiations on the Iran nuclear deal. Iran, not known for being particularly progressive when it comes to women's rights issues, as many of us know, that was a very unique situation you found yourself in, sitting across the table from a group of men who were negotiating. I'm just curious if you want to tie it to Minister Kalyaran's answer, but also in your own experience, how do you see things and what was your experience in that particular negotiation? Because I'm sure it was quite unique.
Oh yes, it was. But I was lucky because, well, first of all, because it was an amazing experience. Second of all, first of all, actually, because we got to an agreement. So that was actually getting things done. But also because around the table, all the others were men, true. But in the EU delegation, we were mainly women. Actually, almost all, apart from a couple of experts dealing with nuclear-related aspects and sanctions-related aspects, all the others were actually women in my team, which sometimes was taken, especially from the Iranian side, as, is this a political message? I said, no, just by coincidence, you're all men, we're all women, that's okay. But it's true that also all the other ministers were men. There was no other woman around the table of the photos, let's put it this way, but on my team there were, and on the US team, Wendy Sherman was the key person, obviously together with John Kerry, with whom we were leading negotiations. So the real team behind the scene was very much a women team. But if you look at the picture of the agreement, the photo op, as often is the case, I was the only woman. It was in those negotiations that was not an issue. I have to admit, and by the way, I have to recognize that Iranian administration had also some women in the team, in particular on communication and media. There were some women working in their team, and I never felt that was an issue at that time. I guess that things might be different today, but there's no negotiation today, basically. So it would be different on many different aspects, but this is another story. I felt many times the difficulty, not so much of being a woman, but as I said, of being a relatively young woman, or a woman considered young. Because when I was, as I mentioned, when I became minister at 41. I don't think it's normal to consider someone young at 41. I'm Italian, true. In Italy, you're considered young even at 60. But there is an advantage in that. As I grow up, as I get older, I see the advantage. But it was not. It was a sign of a prejudice that was piling up against the generation, not against the generation, but still. The feeling was also, I call it, now forgive me, it's very, what I'm saying is probably very weird. Most of you in this room are too young to remember one of the first Madonna songs, one of the most famous ones, Who's That Girl? And I call it the Who's That Girl effect. I always had this feeling that my interlocutors were thinking, then I'm being blonde. Okay, yes, you're just a girl. You're just a girl. And I had spent years in Parliament. I had started studying international affairs since my very early age. And maybe the persons that were skeptical about me being not competent or experienced enough were younger than me. My Prime Minister was younger than me, had never been in Parliament, and nobody questioned his role. And so, but that was, I think, not so much of being a woman, but being a combination of relatively young woman. I'm sure that had I been a man of that age, or a woman a little bit more experienced, like now, there would have been much less issues. But this combination was particularly challenging, and I've always been, I think, lucky that my character brings me to just not consider too much what media say, or otherwise you don't survive in this world. But I was noticing something that the three of us actually have mentioned in this that is interesting for me. That refers a bit to what Susanna said. the capacity to adapt and to get the possibilities. We all were thinking of different things, you know, as life is what happens when you're busy making other plans, was the Beatles song. Sorry, I'm quoting too much of a pop culture here. It's noticing that I moved out from the institutions, but it's really the capacity to keep an open mind and focus on what it's interesting for you in that moment to do. I also never planned to do what I was doing next, and it happened. But it happened not by coincidence. It happened, I think, because there was a combination of opportunities that were opening up and me being the right person and considered to be the right person, at least for some, to do that job. And that, I think, is the result of keeping an open mind, being able to transfer your capacities or your knowledge in different sectors, and also having the courage not to follow a path that people would expect you to follow. Business or law, or in my case, when I decided not to continue in the institutions, and now I'm doing something completely different as director of the College of Europe, and I'm extremely happy about that. Everybody was expecting me to continue. You know, you're there, and so now what do you do next? It's politics, so you go back to Italy or you stay in the European. And I think that this courage to stop and think, what do I really want to do? What is really right for me to do at this stage? Even being able to change completely, as you did, I think this is one of the elements, I don't know if of leadership, but for sure of happiness.
Thanks for that. I'm going to open the floor in just a moment, so students, please prepare yourselves. I'm coming to you in just a second. But I want to just ask Minister Malkora one last question. And it's something that I've been thinking about quite a bit recently, and I see George Papandreou's here as a former Prime Minister of Greece. I was thinking about the difficult decision that you all have to make throughout your careers, whether they be personal, whether they be professional, but specifically in your role. It seems like once a decision comes to you, you usually have a choice between two pretty difficult choices. You never get the easy ones, right? The easy ones were already made elsewhere. And I'm just curious how you managed to sift through a choice between two potential bad outcomes, so choosing the lesser of two bad outcomes. Our episode with you is about the 2014 Ebola crisis. There were no good choices to be made in that crisis. So I'm just curious if you have a perspective on that.
Well, let me say something before I go to the answer. I am not that sure that women have gained so much space. To contradict a bit Marina, I think we have enlarged the space, but I think there is a counterattack, very heavy counterattack against women in power. And I will say to the women who are sitting there, you need to go for power. There is no other alternative. So don't put it in nice words. Power is the game, because that's where things are defined. For example, what choice do you make among two or more really bad options? And I think there, first you have to be very well informed. I mean, you need to have the substantive content of all these options. So you know, this is hard work. It's not something that you do by hunch. So you need to go deep into what are the reasons for the different options, ask all the questions, often with very little time, and doing that under pressure makes it even more difficult. And once you weigh all those options, you just need to decide. Somebody told me that sometimes it's not so important to make the right decision, but to make the decision right. And then you have to work to make sure that the decision you have taken is made right. This is, as a bottom line, the message. Everything we have done, that we are doing, is hard work. There is nothing that falls from the sky and makes you a leader and makes you take the right decisions. It's just day in and day out, vesting and investing on hard work.
Thank you.
May I add
please,
to what you said? I very much agree with everything you said. but the question also is that not all decisions are always right. You might think that it is a right decision at a certain point, but later you discover it wasn't. So it means that you also have to have the courage to say it was wrong or it wasn't the best one, change the course, decide and continue working. Because I do not understand those who understand that there was a mistake or the decision wasn't the best one, but refuse to acknowledge it. The more you refuse, the more difficult the situation becomes. So mistake, accept, change, decide, continue, work.
And also, if I may,
please.
There are decisions that are good in one moment, and 5 minutes later they're not anymore. So the timing of the decision is as relevant as the content of the decision, because the situation changes.
So we have about 10 minutes or so left together, so I wanted to take this opportunity to open the floor. I think there are microphones circulating somewhere. There they are. Hi. So if you all have any questions, I've got plenty, but in case you're tired of hearing from me, great, we've got some in the audience.
Thanks so much. Thank you to all the speakers. This one might particularly be for Minister Calderon, but in many ways, with a career in the diplomatic service, there's a power in the anonymity of serving your country and not necessarily having anyone know that you are the ambassador or the foreign minister by name. But obviously you had an experience where your identity and your image became part of the issue in 2007, and it became something where you were now known as part of the problem for these counterattacks, for example. So did that experience and kind of coming out of the anonymity of doing your job, you know, in that crisis situation, did that end up making you a better leader after that, or a better diplomat, or did that hinder you at all because of this naming experience?
It's a very good question. First of all, I do not agree with you. People don't know me globally. People don't know me. Yes, they do know me in Estonia, that's true. And that was the reason why, after serving as an ambassador and foreign minister, only then I joined politics. I never even thought about political career. For me, politicians were political prostitutes. I didn't like them. But at some point, I received the question, how come you're not in politics? You're known in Estonia, you're respected in Estonia, we know your career, you're encouraging women to go into politics, and you're in the sidelines. So yes, I agree that I'm known in Estonia, and that was the reason why I decided to go to politics, and I do not regret it anymore. But it wasn't an easy decision, because in 5 minutes I became from a very nice, prominent, friendly ambassador, foreign minister, just a politician. And let's say the renommee of politicians in Estonia is not high, is not good. So yes, it influenced my path and my career. And thanks to that, I was elected to the European Parliament. You're not elected to the European Parliament if people don't know you and if they don't vote for you.
Thank you very much. I think I see another question there.
Yes, thank you. Oh, is this working? Yes, it is. Hi, I have a question about, it's a bit philosophical, I guess, but what is a healthy relationship with power for you? Because you talked about, don't be afraid to tell, I want to be foreign minister, da, da, da. But on the other hand, I think it can't be like that fulfilling in itself. Like when you get to the top job, I imagine like the people are often not satisfied because there's always the next thing. I could always be prime minister, I could always be president, I could always be next things. And I also imagine it's difficult to transition once you're in power to a, let's say, a lesser position or not as exposed. So what is for you a healthy relationship with the power that you had? And how do you work with maybe transitioning to a position of less power?
Thanks for that question. I'd love to hear the responses from everybody on this. Minister Mogherini, I'll start with you.
I volunteer because I didn't react, but I feel a little bit different from what Marina and Susanna said about power. You have power in different situations. I don't feel that I have less power now that I'm director of the College of Europe than I had before. I have a different power. But I do have, actually, I even have more power on the life of students. And I think that what is most relevant, I mean, not everybody needs to go for power. You can be perfectly fulfilling your aspirations, your interests, your happiness, and yourself without going for top positions in power. It's perfectly okay not to do that. And I think that we should not have, not only we women, also men, should not have the pressure for getting to the top positions in power. First of all, because life is made of different things and components, and the balance among these things is important. And I think it's always good and important to take 1 minute a day, if you manage to have 5, it's better, to think of what is really important for you. And to exercise power on your life, first of all. Because then sometimes you have power on world peace, difficult, but then maybe you don't have power on your own agenda and what you do tomorrow morning. And obviously it's a price to pay, but you have to consider what kind of power you want to have. And it's an individual choice, and it's okay whatever choice you make. And also because I think that you have power in many different positions and situations. I give you an example. Every year at the College of Europe we have a patron de promotion, a patron that gives the name to our students for that promotion of that year. And last year, and it's a choice of the rector, so I have the power to take this choice, but I ask students to give me suggestions and indicate who they would like to have as next patron de promotion. And last year, I took a very unpopular decision on the advice of 2 students that actually indicated to me a completely unknown Belgian lawyer, a woman, that nobody knew, not even in Belgium, that has worked for all her life on gender pay gap. And for me, that choice, Eliane Vogelpolsky, by the way, if anybody here studies law and is interested in this, and for me that was a way to tell to the students, you can have power if you are a prime minister, a president, a member of parliament, an ambassador, a lawyer. You can have power if you are a professor, you have a lot of power, you give marks. You can have power whatever you, a teacher, you can have power whatever you do in life, because you have a responsibility to change things or to run things in your own field of action. Obviously, you can aim high, and it's okay to say this to yourself and to the rest of the world. My personal experience, I have to admit, is not this. I never looked for power. For me, having positions of power, recognized position of power, was always the price I had to pay, was not an element of satisfaction in my life. And I was relieved when I could step out of that institutional power to go to a different kind of power, because I felt that what goes together with the institutional power positions was a very high price for me to pay. The media attention, being every day, all day on stage, and security, not freedom, no freedom on your agenda, on your family life, on anything. You are constantly exposed. And that is, for me, that was a price to pay, not to have a power position, but to have a responsibility position, a position that allowed me to take choices that could have had an impact on things I cared about. Good or bad, I don't know. One tries to make the best. But for me, power was, was something I didn't like to live or to feel, but was something I recognized was part of the package, and it was a price I was ready to pay. And again, I don't feel, everybody was very surprised when I decided not to continue in politics, so I did the contrary of what you did, Marina. But for me, it was personally a relief, but professionally, an upgrade, because I feel now that I am actually contributing to the European integration and to foreign policy through a different angle, forming generations of students that will then be the officials and the ministers of tomorrow, literally tomorrow, hopefully, not tomorrow in 20 years. And for me, this is now the best way to give back. And for me, this is a very high level of power. So I think, I think that relation with power is very individual, very personal, and we should be careful in following somehow cliches about, okay, before it was men, and still is a lot, men proceeding with their careers with a power pattern, and now it should be us. I think it would be good for all of us to take it more on an individual basis and scale it up and down according to what our priorities are.
Please.
To complement what Federica just said, we need to define what power is. And when I say power, I mean the capacity to shape, to influence, to rethink the way things are done. And that you can do from many different places. But you need to go for this notion of not being an observer only, but and you have that capacity, as Federica had indicated, in many different positions, in many different places. Being a teacher, you are very powerful, no question about it. But you have to recognize that notion of changing things, because that is what really shapes the world, in whichever place you are. For me, that is power. It's not the symbolism of power, which is very different. The symbolism of power is having a chauffeur, having being invited to special places, flying first class, being ushered through the airports. That's symbolism. You go from there to walking through gate 822 without anybody with you. And being able to handle that is also power. It's the power to manage your own life. And that is, I will argue, what Federica described as her own experience is part of the difference, I will argue, between the notion of power of most men and the notion of power of most women. So when I say go for power, what I say, commit to changing things. And in order to change things, you have to be somewhere in the kitchen being able to shape the recipe. Sometimes you do it just peeling potatoes, but you are there and you have to feel your impact. And that's what I mean by power, and that's what I mean by women shying away often from this notion of power, which is not the traditional male notion of power.
Minister Kalyurand, you got the first word on screen, and now you get the last word in person.
Thank you. Yes, I also agree that power has very different meanings. And I was just thinking, the powerful positions I've been at, they all had different accents, different backgrounds, different implications. I had the privilege of cooperating with Federica when she was High Representative and I was Estonian Foreign Minister. There were, how many of us, 27 at the table at that time? It was 28, yes, it was with UK then, 28 at the table, and we were discussing foreign policy. Did I feel that they listened to me? I never felt I was ignored. Of course, I knew that I will not be very strong on the topics where I do not have enough knowledge or where my country does not have enough history of cooperating with, let's say, Africa. We have never had embassies there. Nobody expected me to be very strong and focused on those questions. But where my colleagues knew that I have knowledge, some knowledge about, they looked at me and they listened to me. And when I joined the European Parliament, I would say that I have even more power there. Because when I'm negotiating one file on behalf of the Social Democrats, which is the second biggest fraction, political group of the European Parliament, I have 150 votes. So I have never received so many calls from commissioners or even ministers of other countries or secretaries of other countries trying to lobby, trying to influence, because they do not see only me, but they see me plus 150 votes. And it's a huge power. So I agree that power has different faces, has different times, and I don't think that there is even one place where you do not have power at all. If you're a housewife, you have power. If you're a janitor, you have power. I so well remember what JFK, it's one of the stories of JFK when he went to the NASA center and he saw janitor in the corridor. And he said it was absolutely clear what he was doing there with the bucket. But he approached the person and asked, "Sir, what are you doing here?" And the answer was, "I'm working to send Americans to the moon." So it's very much the question of attitude. He might have said, "I'm cleaning the floor." He was sending Americans to the moon. So it's very much in our brains, in our thinking, how we think about what we can do, and if we can influence and participate in decision making at whatever level, it's already a power. Thank you.
So I'm looking at the time, and I'm afraid our hour together has come to an end. I could do this all day, to be honest with you. I really appreciate the time that you took to do this and have this conversation with us. One of the things I love most about my job, actually, is I get to sit here and learn and speak to incredible people, and I hope that you all benefited as I have in the last hour. Thank you all very much. Please join me in thanking our guests today. Just one housekeeping item as we rotate on and off the stage. Please stay in your seats. We're going to go right to the second panel, and I'm going to hand the microphone and the duties of moderating over to the Vice Rector here at Charles University. Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Okay, good afternoon. Welcome to the second panel. To be honest, I'm really greatly honored to be sitting here with this great company, which I will introduce very shortly. So we have the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Israel, Ms. Tzipi Livni, the former Minister of Foreign Affairs of New Zealand, Don McKinnon, and the former Prime Minister of Greece, George Papandreou. So thank you very much for being here. I will start with something easy, not really, but I will follow up on the short documentary that we had at the very beginning, which was mostly about cybersecurity, let's say. But I will try to take it to the more general level, maybe, because the technologies that are really driving the society, driving our lives, quite in general, and it's getting more and more profound in life as we know it. And it's mostly about the spread of the information and how we perceive it, how we work with it. And of course the traditional topic, but very important topic, we will probably never get bored of it because it's so important that we need to deal with it, is disinformation or misinformation, or however we call it, which can divide societies, divide countries, and it's quite difficult to deal with it. So as a first topic, I would like to talk about how you approach that in your countries, what's your experience with that, and whether there is any reasonable way how to go forward without breaking our societies. Doesn't sound too positive at the very beginning, but it's I think very essential and crucial for the overall discussion. And I would like to start with Tzipi, if I may.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you. At first, I would like to say something about the first panel that was really, really, really great. I mean, to listen to you, and I feel frankly the same as a woman. And this is the right, symbolically, honoring Madeleine Albright, speaking about the challenges as women in power. Thank you for that. And in a way, I think that after the era, maybe, of Me Too as victims, it's time to say Me Too in power. And it doesn't mean that each one of you need to search for power, but it is more in terms of when we have a vision, when we believe that there is something that needs to be done, so yes, we should say it and we should be there. And the world, the global community and other leaders should respect it and accept it. So it's not only personal issue, but it's also, I believe, global issue. And thank you for that. Well, speaking about information, misinformation, disinformation, I think that this is what we are facing. At first it was about information, later misinformation, yes, we didn't check the facts, and later disinformation, meaning we are going to influence the society with lies. This is what it is about. And this affects the nature of democracies. Because in a way, the social networks were created in order to connect people, but it turned into something that divides people. Because it's not about the same reality. Because I'm following 1, 2, 10, 100 commentators, or those that share with me the way they see the reality. It's not just about information. And he can be influenced by others. So there is no real common denominator, even when we are having a dispute. So the base, it's not the same base, it's not the same reality, it's not a different understanding of the same reality, but a completely, or different views, but it's a completely way of seeing the reality. And democracy is paying the price. And more than that, in democracy, in order to be or to influence, you are voting, as was mentioned in the end of Marina's vote, vote, vote. But using the social networks, and this is something good, everyone can have not only a vote, but a voice. But these voices turn also into hatred, lies, spreading these lies and hate. So things that are part of technology, part of progress, turn into a problem to democracies. And frankly speaking about Israel, we are paying the price of it. The results of elections were based on, unfortunately, hatred, lies. And this is going to impact the nature of Israel as a democracy by forming a government which is based on this, changing the nature of democracy, the institutions, and therefore it looks like a problematic situation in different countries, but it's global. And I believe that, liberals of the world unite. We should deal with it together and to think together what can be done. Because otherwise, the societies within different countries is being divided, but also what is important for me, and this is multilateralism and working together, different countries that share the same set of values. I'm not sure that how much this will continue if we'll have these changes amongst democracies inside.
Thank you. So do you think, if I pass to George, is there a way how to, well, I don't want to be too pessimistic, right? But it seems that it's not as complementary with democracy, right? This kind of evolution of things. So is there a way how to treat that or fight that while still remaining democratic?
A good question. I will just have a small parenthesis too about the previous discussion, because I grew up as a feminist. My mother, she still is at 99 a feminist and fought for women's rights. And when I got into certain power, head of the party or in the government, I brought women in the party in equal levels at the higher level. So there would be a woman and a man in the local, regional party structures. But the reason was, it was not just that this was a just cause, that, you know, women were outside of power, they were not having power, or they should have power. But I was trying to break down a stereotype of what power is, a male stereotype of what power is, which has been imposed on us, males. you know, the sort of macho, the strong, as you said, you know, the car, the this and that, or the symbolisms, but it's also, this is the leader. This is how they, so I would see women not simply as looking for power to become the male power, but to change power, change the concept of power. And that's what I felt when I did bring women in. And Tipi, I don't know if I've told you the story. When I was in the presidency of the European Union as foreign minister, we used to have these in Greece, and I had to come to the Middle East, and particularly on the Israeli-Palestinian issue, I would not go to the officials first. I would meet with the women's groups, Israeli and Palestinian women first, to get their opinion, and then go to the officials. And they had many more solutions, and were much closer together than the usually male counterparts in the, although you, of course, were in a different position, Tipni, yourself. But anyway, I think that, well, what can we do with disinformation? Obviously, one which is not easy, but we have to rethink our schooling, first of all. I think that's one area. We train in our schools for professions, for not necessarily for being citizens and not necessarily for more critical thinking. We consume information in schools, but we do not really look at I mean, I'm not thinking about this level, but generally our citizens are there to become good, highly skilled workers maybe, or skilled workers, but not to be very critical about relations, power, and so on. And this is, I think, very important. So they can have the tools to actually sort of see when there's disinformation, or at least be more critical about what they consume. That's one issue. The second is, I think we need to think of when is misinformation or disinformation being accepted. I remember when I was Prime Minister and I had to deal with a financial crisis, and I had to take very painful decisions for the Greek people, cutting wages and cutting pensions and so on. That's when conspiracy theories started to grow. Why? Because people, when people are confronted with difficult situations and difficult changes and painful situations, it's logical for them to say, oh, maybe there's a different solution. You go to a doctor, he says you've got cancer. Maybe I go to another doctor. Maybe there's a different thing I do. So and I think what we have in our societies today is our very complex and difficult crisis we are going through. And I think this allows for a lot of disinformation to be accepted. So people bring up conspiracy theories. I remember when I was, this is a little bit relevant to what's happening now. People were saying, well, why don't you get Russian money? And, you know, they will bail you out. So people believe that if I went to Putin, and I actually went to Putin, he didn't give me any money, but he wanted me to buy tanks. But people thought that he was going to bail us out. And that was a conspiracy theory, and said, why aren't you bailing us? Why aren't you bailing out? Why do we have to do all these sacrifices? Anyway, so this was a conspiracy theory that took hold. But I think there's another element too, because Chippy was saying that people do get involved with social media platforms and they talk and so on, but I think it's a bit of a false power. People don't really have power. And I think what we need to think of is, if people feel they have real say, in the end, I think they have to feel more responsible. They will make wrong decisions at times, but they will learn. And I think what we need to think of is, who owns these platforms? Well, in China, it's basically controlled by the state. I mean, they're private, but the data is controlled by the state. In the U.S., and it's not just the U.S., these are not U.S. only, these are global platforms like Facebook and whatever, and Amazon and Twitter, of course. And okay, so Elon Musk buys Twitter. Who is Elon Musk? I mean, okay, he's a sort of a folk hero, but is he the one that's going to decide on how a platform where millions of people are discussing how the rules are going to be made? So I say, why don't we think of creating maybe the European Parliament in Europe, or maybe our national parliaments? We should have these platforms for our citizens, not that we shouldn't have private platforms, but let's have public platforms where citizens actually have a voice in making decisions, or at least influencing decisions, officially. So I'll just give you an experiment I tried when I was, for my brief period as Prime Minister. We called them wiki laws. So we would post every law before it went to Parliament on the website. And we said, before it is going to the Parliament, it will go to the people. We will get all their important inputs. Then it will come back to the Cabinet. We will take on board what we think is positive and then take it to the Parliament. So we tried to build a platform where citizens could actually have a voice. Now this needs to be worked on, but I think this is the kind of thing we need. Think of an electronic agora where citizens actually can decide or influence the laws that are being passed in parliaments. Sort of a fourth sort of body of democracy. And one other thing we did, which I think also has helped, we said every expenditure of Greece, every expenditure of the public from central to local government is online. And if it's not online, it's illegal. So no minister or mayor or director of any agency can make any decision and it be legal if it's not online. So then what it did bring is more transparency so that people they could say, okay, this is what's happening. So I think there are some things we can do to actually use technology to enhance democracy. And then we have to rethink who owns these platforms and who's making the decisions, because that's also a democratic challenge. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I liked all the points, but what I really liked was the schooling point, right, which is super challenging, because if we learned maybe something from the financial crisis before, we probably almost forgot about it, right? After all these crises that were in between, we almost forgot about it. But if we learn something, at least here, we always talk about financial literacy, right? That we need to teach children from the early age how to treat money, how to budget, and how to do these things. So if the step from now, from the COVID pandemic, and maybe in Europe from the Russian war on Ukraine, is how to teach children and people, of course, then how to treat information, which is much more challenging than teaching them how to do addition, subtraction, and what the interest rates are, right? So that's a great challenge, but it's true that it needs to be done, but it will be very challenging. Thank you for that. So if I may now pass to Don for the New Zealand perspective.
Well, thank you very much, and really do appreciate being here with you all. It's some 10 years since our Aspen ministerial group came to Prague, and since then, in many cases, the world's been through hell. But now that at least most of COVID is behind us and people are travelling again, it's good to get away from our 2 years of exile in the bottom of the world. But let me tell my Madeleine Albright story, because it kind of highlights some of the things we've been talking about. I first met Madeleine in 1992 when she had been appointed ambassador to the UN. I was New Zealand Foreign Minister and dutifully met and discussed and talked and got to know her. And it was a little bit later she told me how that she, since she had got to the UN, decided about every couple of months to have a luncheon just with the UN women ambassadors. Well, that certainly reverberated around the world. And I think 6 months later, the number of women ambassadors went from 6 to about 36, as governments decided, well, this is our way to get through to the United States. Of course, we have a woman who can be an ambassador for us, which they hadn't thought about before. But there we are. One woman did remarkable things. We're all challenged now, of course, by this whole information media running around the world. And as anyone in politics knows, if you give a lie a 1-minute start, you will never catch it. It'll go around the world and come back to you before you do anything. And that is what we're all facing. And it's not a question of how do you stop it. It's how do we best use the technology that is there. The technology, when I went and became a member of parliament in my country in 1978, there wasn't even a thing called a fax machine. Those are now dinosaurs in the current day, and we've moved a long way since then. But the way information is utilised by political parties can be used of tremendous benefit to the whole country. It can also set the country on a course which it should not be doing because it's just the wrong thing at the wrong time. So it's nothing that is peculiar to any part of the world, but there are people who will use information technology in a way which is of benefit to them and their cohort, but of no benefit to the rest of the country at all. But if it gets a head start, it's often very hard to stop. And I think the regretful things that we have noticed in recent years, and I think it pretty much probably began in the United States, the way that major political parties, which generally for the last 70, 80 years worked together, are no longer working together and becoming further and further apart. Well, I'm not suggesting countries of liberal democracies are about to become autocracies in any way, but there are certain autocratic elements emerging within democracies as though there's only one group responsible or one group that's in charge, one group making all those decisions. And again, it's quite easy to do if you just put out a strapline on TV and it gets away and people believe it as being the gospel for the day or for the week. So again, political parties have to adapt to that. They've got to use it to their benefit, not try and stop it. No different anywhere. A country's culture is based on its history and the makeup of its people. You do not change a country's culture very easily. And in my time and working in different parts of the world, the most recent elected job I was in was the Commonwealth Secretary General, where I worked in a lot of Commonwealth countries who were somewhat deficient in their democratic credentials. And soon realised that trying to change a major aspect of a known democracy, maybe not a full democracy, but at least generally had all the characteristics of a democracy, to change even a small element in their electoral structure or in their judicial structure or in their parliamentary structure, you were looking at 20 years, 25 years before you knew that it could be built into the whole inner part of that country. And to change a whole country, the culture of a whole country, and I often look at Singapore as an example, it's probably taken 3 generations for Singapore to become, is probably as much a liberal democracy as it ever will become, but in an area where liberal democracies are straining all the time to stay within and can easily fall without. So there's just a huge amount of work, and I take up my 2 colleagues here, Zippy and why do I forget his name? It's an age factor. From Greece, education is a very important factor, and it begins at 4 and 5 years old, not just suddenly when they arrive at university.
Thank you very much. I will probably continue building on this narrative of disinformation, conspiracies, and sitting here in Prague and Central/Eastern Europe, we don't like that much, but Eastern Europe, but let's put it like that. It's hard not to mention the war, right? Like Russian war on Ukraine, which is connected to the same topics, the threats to democracy, disinformation, conspiracies. But it's usually different perspectives we take on that, not treating who did what or whatever, but how we consider it, how important we consider it, right? Like the experience in the Eastern Europe is more hands-on with the, let's put it like Russian influence, right? So we might treat it as the most important topic in the world, but if we move a bit more to the West, it maybe becomes less of a topic, but still important one. So I'm just wondering whether and how is this a topic in your countries, or how you see it. Of course, I don't want to get into much of a depth there, but just considering, you know, depending on how far you are from the geographical perspective, from that, how much of a topic it remains, or whether it's just one of the topics that are happening, or it's the major one. And I will probably start the closest geographically. I would start with George, if I may.
Well, I think it's a major issue, and I think it's been revealed now, and that this has been a systematic effort from the Russian side for not only producing disinformation. I think their tactics are a number of tactics, and of course, Marina may have more to say as a direct neighbor, and having gone through the cyber attack. But that is more an overt. I think there's much more covert work, either with money, not only through business, but just money that gets in one way or another, and influencing politics. That's a wider issue, of course, but there's Russian money, obviously. And we see politicians not only in Central or Eastern Europe, or ones that are closer to Russia. I see it in Greece. I've seen it and we've seen it all the way to the US, but particularly in Western Europe, there are parties that have gotten money from one way indirectly from Russia. Secondly, I think what the disinformation, what they do is they will play on existing problems. So if there is a racial problem in the US, they will see how they can exacerbate that problem. If there is a conflict in the Balkans, they will want to exacerbate the ethnic tensions. If there is a polarization in a society between different parties, they would like to exacerbate that polarization. And I think, so absolutely is what they're doing. The question is what we do. And I think this is how we have to look ourselves in the mirrors as democracies. How we make sure our democracies are robust. How our democracies really are working for our citizens. Because we do have deep inequalities in our societies. As Chipi was saying, these polarization inside through the social media. Social media with these algorithms that are playing on hatred and playing on your base emotions, because that's the way they can get your attention to sell. So algorithms are made in order to bring your attention, and therefore they are building on your emotions and not on your logic, much more, and not on consensual, because consensual is nice, but it doesn't create the reaction of when you're, let's say, out in a forest and an animal is going to comes to you react. Well, this is the kind of emotion we still have as animals ourselves, and this is what algorithms use to catch your attention. And how is it? It's hatred, and it's fear, and it's maybe sex or whatever, but it's much less the logical, slower, necessary thinking that actually democracies need. And so I think this is one area we really have to think through, and it's partly technology, but it's partly also our institutions. And I think that we also have one other problem with the social platforms, with these social networks. If we go back to ancient times, not everybody was, of course, a citizen. Women were not, there were slaves, but the concept was that all citizens had to sit together to discuss. So somebody who was opposing, who had a different view, you had to sit with him. It was only a him, but still, you had to sit with him and debate. Marina was saying before, in the European Parliament, they're from the ultra-left to the ultra-right, but you sit and you debate. Well, in the social platform, we don't have to do that. we can just create our own little group and feed on it and feed on it and feed on it. So this is where I think, again, if we have to see how we can use these platforms, change them so that there is real debate and we have different views coming there, but then types of algorithms that can help in finding consensus and not simply split and polarization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will now follow the geographical pattern to Israel, where the position was not so clear at the beginning, right?
Unfortunately, but it changed. But just to continue the first question, I think that it's important to ask for responsibility and accountability when it comes to the big techs, because we didn't discuss it. And this is important. And it should be worked out globally, not just waiting for the United States to make its own decisions. And the good news is that there are also some new technology that can follow the sources of disinformation and hate speeches and to tackle it together. Important to say. Speaking about Russia, just when Marina, when you were speaking about Marinuchka, this is I was thinking about my first meeting with Putin. I accompanied the Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, who came to Russia. I had a meeting with Putin. I was Minister of Immigrant Absorption, especially of those Jews who came from former Soviet Union, came to Israel. And my role was to integrate it into the Israeli society and to encourage them to come to Israel. So first meeting with Putin, and Ariel Sharon said, this is Tzipi Livni, she is the Minister of Immigrant Absorption. And Putin looked at me and said, aha, you nominated a beautiful lady so she can tempt the Russian to come to Israel. And I was shocked, and then the next day I was interviewed, but it was a very close and small meeting, but the next day I was interviewed to the Israeli radio, and the first question was, how did you feel about President Putin saying this? Well, somebody leaked it from this very small meeting. I think it was Ariel Sharon himself. And the choice was between bad options. Well, what can I say? I was insulted and affect the relation between Israel and Russia, or to say that I was asked whether it was complimenting or insulting. Well, speaking about that, but seriously now to the situation. I think that the shock, I mean, people are asking, there are other conflicts in Africa and people are dying. Why we are so worried about the situation in Russia? And this is not only because it's in Europe and you have adjacent countries. I think the shock came because this is Russia, a member of the United Nations Security Council, that is completely breaking the rules. It's not another conflict. It's a Russian invasion without any real cause to the Ukraine, and this is why it is so shocking. And yes, at the beginning, Israel was thinking, or the Israeli leadership was thinking about our security interest because of the Russian presence in Syria, which we have a border with, and is being abused by the Iranians to infiltrate weapons to Hezbollah, a terrorist organization in Lebanon. Not important, and I believe that it was less important also at the time, and I said it also publicly in Israel, because I think that when this thing is happening, so the choice is very easy. I mean, you should stand with the Ukrainians, with the free world, and be part of it against what is happening, and making a decision, standing. I mean, in the right with those that completely unprovocative were attacked. This is now the Israeli position, but it took some time at the beginning, unfortunately. But speaking also about social networks, I think that we know that the first thing that Putin did in Russia is to stop it, because he wants his people to get information just from his sources. And this is why at the beginning when this happened, we all asked, okay, it will not take much longer because, of course, the Russians will act against it, will demonstrate, will do something against it, but they have a completely different understanding of the situation, and that's why he can get the support. And this is really a break of the rule of the international system, makes it impossible in the United Nations Security Council to get any decision on this such an important issue. So this is why it's a global issue. It's not even it's not only Russia, Ukraine, and not only EU issue, but it's a global issue. And now when Europe is facing the winter, there is a huge question because it's like always, it was the first line, the first headlines. Now it's not maybe the last page of the new newspaper, but it's not the first issue. And I was surprised in a way when I visited another country in EU a few weeks ago, and I discovered that while the leadership supporting the Ukraine and is willing to pass this winter and to pay the price in energy and so, the people is not in the same place. And I'm afraid that we'll face a situation in which politicians will face the demand of their people not to do the right thing and to stand with the Ukraine, something that at the beginning it was completely the opposite. Because I think that the right decisions of Europe, the EU leaders, also were influenced by, the first demonstrations in the streets, that people just took the streets with the Ukrainian flags and colors, and now it may change. And I'm afraid that this would influence the decisions of some leaders in Europe.
Yeah, thank you. I totally agree. Now, passing the word to New Zealand and Don, and talking about temptation, as you talked from the different. I'm now really tempted to make some Mordor and Lord of the Rings parallel, right? But I will not. So how about New Zealand? It's very far. But.
Yeah, a long way from everywhere. If you're willing to come to New Zealand, you could leave here tonight, and you would finally get there 23 hours later, almost non-stop. But nevertheless, we do seem to get tourists coming back, which we're delighted to have after a long gap of 2 years without many tourists at all. The effect of Ukraine and this whole issue more has a deep effect on a liberal democracy like New Zealand. And we have been a liberal democracy since the 1850s. We feel very bad about those that want to become liberal democracies and are prevented from doing so. And being here in this country, we know what you went through, the 1940s, 50s, and so on. So it is not without some sense of feeling when come to a place like Prague and think of what's happening in Ukraine now. So yes, of course, we stand with Ukraine. We've committed, I think, 150 of our military officers to train Ukrainian officers in the United Kingdom as we speak, and that will just continue as long as they are needed. But underneath that, the economic side. This has been a huge economic disruption to the whole world. For the world that worked actually very smoothly for almost 70 years as a result of the post-Second World War, of NATO, the European Union, the US-Japan relationship, the UN, all those institutions were working fairly well. Suddenly, they've all been disrupted. And for those of us who were always criticising the Security Council for being sort of out of date, unbalanced, I used to say the Security Council will stay as it is until it proves to be so incompetent and an inability to do anything that the world will see it change. That day might have come, that there can be a war in Europe, in Ukraine, and the Security Council can do nothing. two large autocracies, Russia and China, it may even be a pivoting point for both of them as to whether they will survive in their present form. We have not seen crowds opposing a Chinese government since 1989 in Tiananmen Square, as what has been seeing now, opposition to this very limited vision of how to deal with COVID in China. And for a country that was actually moving in the right direction under Deng Xiaoping, under Jiang Zemin, under Hu Jintao, and then suddenly it's going into reverse. That is not good for China, won't be good for the rest of the world, but it means that we're going to go through a very disruptive period as a result of China's internal actions and Russia's internal actions. They are the two members of the P5, where there should be far greater responsibility. So it is for the liberal democracies to stand up and be absolutely firm. This is the best way for all people. Everybody wants more freedom than what they've got now anyway, wherever they live. And it can only be if the liberal democracies just are prepared to go the distance. And it may take another decade, it may take longer, but we should not walk away from it.
Thank you very much. I'm checking the time, so I see that, well, the time is running as always, or you have a comment?
Just one comment about your optimism, saying that a country doesn't change so quickly. Fear changes people. And when the social networks are being abused and exploited in order to spread fear, and there are some reasons for this fear, it's not, out of the blue. I mean, when you have your own enemies, when you have immigration that threatens your own family support, or the future of your children, or terror, and therefore it is changing, maybe not the nature at first, but it creates the eagerness of a strong leadership, and it can change the nature of democracy and freedom into more authoritarian leaders, because the choices between, my life or the future of my children and some values like freedom. And therefore I'm less, I don't want to say pessimistic, but less optimistic about it.
Thank you very much. So now I will pass the word to the audience if we have questions. If not, I have some further questions, of course, but... Okay, I see two hands. So in the back, you were the first one, so you can start, please.
Thank you very much. It's a very interesting conversation. And I think just an overall perspective of talking about leadership, but talking about the youth leadership and the vision of this new generation of leaders that are coming in all regions of the world. We have particularly a very contrasting situation in Latin America, having Bukele and Boric in two spectrums of what leadership and the current world might look like after these days. What is the vision of you being on the other side of the spectrum, already have walked that path of leaders, and what is the implications of this leadership grow in a polarized world where we see always two visions and not a lot of common ground to talk and develop further any topics and any common solutions?
Okay, thank you. Are you aiming the question at anyone specific or the volunteer? Okay.
Exactly.
So do we have a volunteer? if I understand it, the question was, what's the perspective on seeing that the leaders are actually becoming more polarized, right? So that we are selecting between two extremes mostly. So we don't have a median, as we usually know from the political science. I'm not a political scientist, but if I remember it correctly, we usually were taught about the median voter, that the leaders should be converging, right? But now we are in the situation where they are mostly diverging. Or was that a question?
It's mostly the idea of these two poles of youth leadership that we are seeing around the world. And what is the expectation? What is the vision that you have looking from the other side about what we need to do? We talk about education, we talk about misinformation, but what is the key components of creating a more diverse, but also a more diverse leadership and expand the common ground for common decisions and a sort of common solidarity to raise?
May I? I think that the answer is speaking with you guys. I mean, I have less expectations from leaders who took power and they expressed authoritarian leadership. But I do believe that we need, in a way, to rebrand democracy, because this is something that is the obvious for many. And since also we are focused now on social networks, so let's us use the social network in order to create networks and to speak and to share our vision about democracy, not just as something which is the obvious and not just a matter of values that cannot be expressed when you have threats, but as something that serve your own interest, life. Most important, this is part of your or our identity. This is why I said before, liberals of the world unite, because when you are a leader or a politician and your country is facing this kind of thing, so you feel alone, frankly. And there's a need also for leaders, more liberal leaders in their own countries, to know that they are not alone. And we can cooperate on this. And I'm speaking now about something that what I call globalization, because it looks like the choice is between globalization and nation states. And being united in your country against the others, or feeling that your country is among other countries, and to know that, yes, we are part of a country, citizens of a country, leaders of a country. We are proud of who we are, but we are also proud of being part of the free world and sharing this set of values with other countries, with other leaders. And it helps when we are facing global threats, and we face this kind of threats during COVID, and we are facing a huge global threat, and this is global warming. So part of our identity is being a citizen of my country, but also a member of the free world, sharing the same set of values and acting together against these global challenges.
I'd just add to what Tsipi was saying about the younger generation being part of it. I think that's very important. I would like to make maybe how I see leadership in dealing with some of these crises we are facing. And I'll be a bit simplistic and make sort of three categories. There are many forms of leadership, many types of leaders, but one is, let's take COVID. So COVID came and, okay, leaders had to deal with the crisis. One way of dealing with that was, let's get back to normal. So that's an understandable knee-jerk reaction of a leader. You know, everybody's saying, looking to the leader, you know, this is not normal. We have to change. We have to go back to normal. We have to go back to where it was. But that's a very passive form, because going back to what normal. What brought the pandemic? Climate change was one of the reasons why we had the pandemic. We'll have more pandemics. So that's not the normal we want to go back to. So we need change. But it's understandable that's the first type of reaction. And there's another type of reaction, the sort of Trumpism type of reaction, which is, oh yeah, somebody else is to blame. Yeah, the bad Chinese, the bad Mexicans, I don't know, and building on this nationalism, building on this racism, building on hate. And I am the solution. I am the leader. I have the solution. Drink chlorine. You know, I have the solution. Trump, when he said drink chlorine, I don't think he believed drink chlorine. He wanted to denigrate the experts because they were becoming more powerful than him. The people were listening to the experts, they weren't listening to Trump. So he had to put them down. This is I mean, he may be an extreme case, but there are many types of leaders that are using this. Well, Israel, maybe, I don't know. You have to talk about your country, what's happening there too. But it's very easy to, and this of course in the end makes people passive. No, not only passive, but polarized. It does not help change. Because if the other one is to blame, why should I change? I just have to get rid of the other one, or fight against the other one, or go to war against the other one, or create a polarized racist society, or whatever. So, and then there's a third type of leadership, a much more difficult one, much more democratic, liberal, as Tiffany was saying, which means involvement. It is bringing in, including, and saying, you know, I may be leading, but I don't have all the solutions. Let's work together. Let's bring every good idea possible. Bring in participation. That often, of course, is a threat to power structures. But we need to change. And you need to push for this. This younger generation, your generation, is maybe the generation that has, we're talking about technology, the most capacities ever, any generation ever had in human history. But maybe you're the last generation to save our civilization too. So you have a huge, huge burden on your shoulders. And of course, these capacities are not spread out. They are very unequal. Some people have them, some people don't. Some countries have them. There's huge inequalities of wealth and income, and that means inequality in technology, in media, in politics, and so on. So your voice in fighting for change and fighting for a more inclusive societies where everyone can contribute to a more participatory type of solution where we actually own the solutions, not some strong, so-called strong leader. I don't like that word. They're not really strong. They're very egotistical, but that's not strong. The more inclusive solutions is what we need, and that is also deepening our democratic societies.
Thank you very much. I was the only one who took pictures to my Instagram.
Okay, good. As long as it's not TikTok, I'm fine. Don?
It is interesting to watch politics develop long after you've left the active scene. And I did leave elected politics, more than 20 years ago. And I can say that my Prime Minister in New Zealand is young enough to be my granddaughter. So you do see things a little differently. But I've watched with great interest, as someone who's involved in politics, the battle that was occurring in the United Kingdom over the change in Prime Minister after Boris Johnson left, and then Liz Truss came along, and so you lose track of who's there. But nevertheless, what it came to me, and I've seen this so often now, and it's one of those things that I think, no, this is not democracy going in the right direction. Every time those candidates are asked a question, you get that split second before they answer when they are mentally saying, what did the focus group say I should say? They weren't saying what they thought. They were saying what they were told would be the best way to garner a vote. Look, it's everywhere. You can see it in the faces of politicians wherever they're campaigning now. I don't know how we're going to get past that one, because you really say to yourself, where do you see the real person? And it also comes back to the fact that whether you're in parliamentary politics, as our countries all are, or pure presidential politics, all elections are treated as presidential elections, and therefore the leader of the opposition is deemed to be, etc., the Prime Minister is deemed to be, sort of thing. And if you're number two, and I was number two for quite a few years, no one bothers about number two. All the focus will be on number one. And so, again, you cannot fight this head on. You've got to somehow meet it, take advantage of what the media are looking for and play to them. Use your own strengths playing to their weaknesses as opposed to your weaknesses playing to their strengths.
Let me just add to that, because I think there is, if we go back to the word politics, it basically means being a citizen of a city, but that's a country. It's citizenship. And politics really was in the ancient times a way of thinking of imagining collectively a better future. Politics today has become a bit of a dirty word. Politics, you know, these politicians, well, it was mentioned earlier. But the actual politics is really, can we, and even as engineers, politics is really a lot of innovation, if you really think of it in a positive way. We are trying to innovate new ways to deal with new crises, new problems, new issues, but do it in a democratic way where people participate in this innovative exercise. So we should think of it as we are still a work in progress. Our representative democracies need to be rethought also, because they are captured by media and big money. And I felt that too. You end up, instead of being an imaginative politician, you become an acrobat, sort of walking on a line where, you know, if you don't have enough money, if you don't say the right thing in 3 seconds, if you don't do this, you fall off. That doesn't allow for imagination. It's a skill, but that's not what politics should be. And I think we need to rethink. For example, look at Ireland. They had the big problem about abortion. You know, a Catholic country, very strongly the church against any kind of talking about abortion and so on. They decided to organize a citizens' assembly. Now this goes back to ancient Athens, actually, where people were chosen by lottery to legislate. So they sat for 6 months, chosen from around Ireland by lottery. So it was a professor and a postman and a barman and a housewife and a lawyer and whatever. Sat down, listened to the experts, and in the end voted about 65% to change the Constitution. Then that went to a referendum, and about 65% of the Irish voted to change the Constitution in favor of allowing abortion. So I think what we're saying is, if you give forms of responsibility in an organized fashion to citizens to be part of our democracies, because I feel this is one of the issues is that people do feel alienated. Some people are making decisions somewhere out there. Who is asking me? We need to rethink how our democracies become more, we give more oxygen to our own democracies, and how power is not so concentrated. We talk about our democracies, but our democracies are also highly influenced by money in politics. I mean, the US is one. Here we have the US. Huge, huge amounts of money going in to influencing not only lobbies but also campaigns. I had a friend of mine, Phil Angelides. He actually ran against Schwarzenegger. It wasn't too easy to run against Schwarzenegger, who was but he told me for his primaries before he was elected, he had to spend about $100 million. How many people can have $100 million? Is this really democracy? So I think we have to be quite critical of our own democracies too, in a positive way. Not to say democracy is bad, no, but let's liberate our democracies. Let's rethink our democracies, that we rebuild them in a way which all you guys can have a much stronger say. Thank you.
No, when you mentioned the bad name on politician, I remember a joke. It's about lawyers, but I'll show it about. I'll change it to politics. That 99% of politicians spread a bad name to this profession. But there are few leaders, international leaders during history that really gives aspiration to many of us. And last thing about democracy, leadership. And the greatest democracy in the world, the United States of America, when the president of the name was not mentioned before, but when a president of the United States is crossing red lines, using social networks to spread conspiracy, does not accept the rules of democracy, rules of law. So these red lines, in a way, doesn't exist anymore in other countries as well. And this should be also said and should be on the table. We need to understand it.
Thank you very much. Thank you to all the panelists. It was a great honor, and I really enjoyed that. And now I will pass the word to Jonathan Price for closing words.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. I know I'm standing between this whole room and lunch, so I'm going to be very brief, which is to say a thank you to our ministers that are here, a huge thank you to the rector, the vice rector, Aspen Institute Central Europe. You're just a tremendous partner for us on this event. The Bertelsmann Foundation, please go watch some more videos. They're coming out. You can check them out on the Bertelsmann Foundation's YouTube. We're going to have something about the transfer of Hong Kong. We're going to have an episode on the Ebola crisis, so always something new and fun to learn. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say we're all here today because of Secretary Albright. And I look at the names on all the sponsors of this event, and she was deeply instrumental in the founding of Aspen Institute Central Europe. She was a trustee of the Aspen Institute. She was our founder and longtime chair of the Aspen Ministers Forum. And it's very strange to be in Prague without her, but it gives me great joy to see this group continuing on. She used to always say that she was an optimist who worried a lot. And I think with this group and with these students, we have a lot to be hopeful for and optimistic about. So thank you very much.